What's going on, everybody? Russell Clay here. I am, of course, a staff writer at fantasyguru.com. Today on Clay's Corner, November 18th, 2021, we are going to be going over NFL draft classes. And this is a really important topic to me because this is the trunk to the tree of my fantasy football world. This is where I base everything in terms of my research, dynasty, season long, sometimes even DFS. I am constantly using not only the NFL draft position, but also how old the draft class is, how they're sort of progressing, and how the NFL landscape is moving. This is the big main tree trunk that I use. And I think you guys will benefit from at least hearing some of my main strategies in evaluating the NFL landscape. Because I think it's really important to always be evaluating football from a real perspective, at least a little bit, before we get into the fantasy football aspect of things. So I'm going to try to keep this short. I said that last week and I went 23 minutes. So I'm going to try to keep this to 10 minutes, but let's just roll through a few draft classes, look at it from a fantasy perspective, and then let's get out of here. So let's jump into the 2013 draft class. And the reason I chose 2013 is because we're starting to see some of these careers shift. So let's take a look at the top guys from this class, right? So the guys that are still kicking, we are 2013. It's the 2013 class. We're in 2021. So that means this class is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years in. So this is year 9 for this class, I believe, unless it's year 8, in which case you can correct my math. So what we have is Deandre Hopkins, Travis Kelce, Keenan Allen, Robert Woods. These are the main guys that are still high-end fantasy contributors from this class. As you can see, the Zach Ertz, Kenny Stills, Jordan Reed, Terrence Williams, if you're a Baylor guy or a Cowboys fan. Then we got Le'Veon falling off, barely on a roster. Gio and RB3, RB4 on the Buccaneers. And then, well, Patterson, who's finally featured in his age 31 season. But what's important here is these guys have been in the news lately. Robert Woods, after never getting hurt in his entire career, at least not in a serious sense, has gone down with a torn ACL in practice. He's 29 now. And as you can see, year 9, and he's kind of potentially off the board. And this is what we see from a draft class. There are a few players that sustain themselves into their late 20s. And then there's about 1 or 2 who sustain themselves into their 30s. So when we're looking at this class, another guy who's been healthy his entire career, Deandre Hopkins, a guy that's been a target hog for 9 years now. Well, 8.5, because only half of his rookie year, but a guy that has just flourished and he's missed 2 games in 8 years, and now has missed 2 games and could miss more in the 2021 season. So this is what happens to these classes, right? This one has actually had pretty good sustainability because it has 3 guys producing into their late 20s in terms of wide receivers. And then we have Travis Kelce, who of course is still putting up high-end numbers. Keenan Allen struggled with injuries early in his career, but has continued to produce and is having a pretty good year this year. But the point is, only a few guys get to their late 20s and still continue to produce. And as we're seeing, like with every class, the Hopkins and Woods, this probably isn't random that guys, in this draft class are starting to fall off this year. We can go back to 2012. Let's look at the wide receivers. So T.Y. Hilton, right? Alshon Jeffrey. These are the two of the guys that maintained production into their late 20s. Now we know in 2021 fantasy football, Alshon Jeffrey isn't even on a team, and Hilton has played 3 games this year. So this is how that goes. And then we all know what's going on with the 2011 class. AJ Green, and Julio Jones. Julio Jones, after being, healthy for almost all of his career, has sort of fallen off that cliff. And as we see, this class is almost totally done at this point. We got Mark Ingram hanging around here. And, the running backs, it's even quicker, which we can probably get into here with some of these next classes. But the point is, when you're looking at these classes, this is kind of what I do for fun, but I think it's a good exercise for you guys as well. We knew coming into this year, this class was going to be very volatile with age. And we're seeing that bear out. Now, does that mean we automatically know that these players are going to get hurt? No, but we do know historically, as classes get into year 7, 8, 9, that's when things start to really fall off a cliff. So this brings us to the 2014 class, a wide receiver class that has really sustained itself well into its later years. Coming into this year, Mike Evans Cooks, Devontae Adams, Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham, Allen Robinson, Sammy Watkins, John Brown, like all these guys were somewhat fantasy relevant still. And if you're not paying close attention, which is why I do this for myself and not just for an example for you guys, it's subtle. Like we don't think about Sammy Watkins anymore because he just isn't relevant for fantasy anymore. But he was playing snaps last year, and now he's just kind of, getting shoved aside by Rashad Bateman and Marquise Brown. Allen Robinson completely fell off a cliff. Now you can blame quarterback play, you can blame whatever, but he's off the cliff. Odell Beckham, basically a 0 this year. Jarvis Landry, still a good player, but banged up. And you go down the list here. I mean, you look at all these guys who were once at least somewhat fantasy relevant. They're just kind of getting swiped off the board without people noticing. So keep that in mind. And again, this is year 7 for 2014. So it makes sense. Mike Evans, Cooks, Adams are still kind of producing at a high clip. And I'd guess 1 or 2 of these guys does produce into their early to mid 30s. Probably potentially Evans and Adams, but that's kind of what we're looking at with the class. And who would have thought Odell Beckham 5 years ago would be the one that is kind of completely falling off the cliff here. So again, this running back class is all but done from here. So we don't really have to talk about that. But let's move into 2015. This is where it gets tricky because we have guys still producing in their mid to late 20s, and sometimes it can be harder to see, but I guess not really with this class because this was kind of a lackluster group. We have Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, Tyler Lockett, Devontae Parker, Darren Waller. So, a lot of these guys had career years last year. Diggs definitely did 1,500 receiving yards. Cooper had a great year, though he did deal with some injuries. Lockett had another 1,000-yard, 10-touchdown season. Devontae Parker had a career year a few years ago. Darren Waller had a career year as well. So it's interesting that they're all kind of taking this same path. Now, Diggs is still producing at a semi-elite level, but he is regressing. And while that could just be the Bills offense not dealing with a COVID defense schedule in 2021, it could be that he's getting older as well. So we want to keep that in mind with this. And this helps with dynasty, but it also helps with season long as well. You look at Amari Cooper, it's subtle. It's subtle. He's still having good numbers, but he's passed by CD Lamb, right? And that's where it's hard to see sometimes. The passing of the torch is happening. Similar with Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf is completely taken over as a featured wide receiver. Clearly and obviously, Russell Wilson being out has affected things. Lockett had some good games early, but Lockett's had like 3 or 4 pretty decent fantasy seasons. And would it be all that surprising if he fell off after this year? He has these 3 great years, and most wide receivers don't have more than a couple good years. So would it be surprising if Tyler Lockett kind of gets into that 806 range to end this year and then kind of falls off from there? It would not surprise me at all. Devontae Parker always dealt with injuries. So would it surprise me if his career just kind of fizzles out from here? Not really. So we are seeing the effects of this class already. Huge effects from this running back class, which was what once highly touted. Gurley, Melvin Gordon, David Johnson, Tevin Coleman, Jay Ajayi, if you remember him. I mean, these guys are all basically being phased out, if not already phased out of their offenses. Melvin Gordon holding on to that starting role. Seems like he might be the guy who sustains himself a few more years, but the rest of these guys are all toasted. So, that's how, if we're talking about wide receiver classes falling off, running backs are just accelerated by a few years. So again, that's what we're looking at here. We're looking to see, all right, there are always outliers. There's always going to be guys who can sustain longer, and there's always going to be guys who can sustain shorter, but always having a semi grasp of what draft class these guys were in can help us kind of figure out, all right, what does my dynasty team look like from here? How many more years am I going to be able to sustain production? And for season long leagues, you can look at this stuff and say, okay, who's getting a little more volatile as we sort of move up this age and draft class cliff? Now, here is a good example of a wide receiver class that didn't have much to begin with. And then you kind of look at that Michael Thomas production. Surprising that he's already potentially fallen off this cliff. And I think maybe there's a chance for rebound here. I'm not necessarily a huge Michael Thomas guy at this point, but this might be a little premature. He's only in his 6th year. And maybe that ankle injury sustains itself and his career is just kind of done. But this would be a guy kind of like Allen Robinson, where he was in year 3, 4, and 5 and not really producing like an elite wide receiver anymore. I don't know that Michael Thomas is done. It seems that way, but he's really young in his career still. So that's something I would kind of look at with perspective here. What else is going on in this class? This class is kind of mediocre, if we're being honest. Tyreek Hill seems like these guys should have a few more years left, but it was such a weak class to begin with that there isn't much going on here. And of course, it's impossible to see Ezekiel Elliott and Derrick Henry when that age cliff is going to come. But that major injury finally came for Derrick Henry this year as he was getting 30 touches per game. And, we just looked at the 2015 class with Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley was on the top of the world and then he was gone. A lot of these guys just disappear at the running back position out of nowhere. So we only know Derrick Henry the last couple of years as the unstoppable wrecking ball, but foot injury mid to late in the year. He may not be 100% to start next year. If he gets another injury next year to compound that, could be a disaster, or he could go the Adrian Peterson way, where he just sustains himself into his 30s. We do see that. So just be aware, but yeah, this is where the running back class is. So 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, 5 years. This is kind of where it starts to fall apart. So that's, Zeke and Henry, they might be able to do the Matt Forte, the LaDainian Tomlinson. Some of these guys sustain till their late 20s. I wouldn't be surprised if it was one of these two, but it is rare. And this is where we really get into, I want to talk about this 2017 running back class, because we're starting to see some fatigue. This running back class was running absolutely pure through 4 seasons. And I think we're kind of hitting the regression point with this class. Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara, Kareem Hunt, Chris Carson, Christian McCaffrey, Leonard Fournette, James Conner. This crew, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We had 9 running backs that were sustaining the running back landscape. And it blew my mind because they all stayed healthy. They all sustained featured roles. It just kept happening. And now we're finally starting to see this running back class start to fall apart. Chris Carson's been on IR most of the year. Christian McCaffrey has not been able to stay on the field the last 2 years. Marlon Mack essentially replaced by Jonathan Taylor. Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon drafted in the 2nd round. So I do think we're going to get some of these guys who sustain themselves into the latter parts of their 20s. But I think it's really important and a cautionary tale that Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey, Kareem Hunt, Leonard Fournette, James Conner, like all these guys are not going to sustain themselves over the next couple of years. And don't be surprised if most of them are gone by 2023. And by gone, I mean in backup or, no longer featured workhorse roles. So I think you can kind of see what I'm talking about as we moved back to, the 2012, 2013, 2014 classes and see almost all of those guys are gone. That's what this class is going to look like in 3 or 4 years. It just is. That's just the reality of the position. There will be a few. There will be the Frank Gores, the Adrian Petersons, but most of these guys are going to be gone in a few years. So I think that's mainly what I wanted to talk about today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I definitely didn't keep it under 10 minutes. We'll see what the time was, but as always, I appreciate you guys checking out this video. Appreciate you guys checking out Fantasy Guru, and I will see you guys next week.